Okay, so I'm gonna teach you how to make this base for your table. So it's the simplest one I could think of. It's just made with like 2x4s, some cast iron wheels, with some rubber on it. It's pretty resistant. It's not really well painted, but I mean it's kind of okay. So first of all, we need to check them and measure the dimensions of our actual table saw. In my case, I made it a little bit shorter than usual, so the screws, well, the bolts that you need to bolt to the actual base, they are outside of the base, so I can move it around and return it to the base anytime I needed to. Here, actually, I use really rough lumber, construction 2x4s. These 2x4s in Mexico, they do not have the round rubber on the edges, so it was a little bit easier to sand them all at once. The cost of it, actually, I'm not entirely sure how much is in the United States or any other country, but I mean, it's the cheapest one I could imagine of. One trick actually to sand the flush is to, with a pencil, just put some marks on it and until they disappear. Basically, you're already done, and actually it's a really good trick to make really flush pieces of wood. Now, for this construction, we will need some 1.5 inch screws, or I mean, you can use basically any type of screws that you think of is completely fine. Here I'm just sanding the other faces just to get them a little bit nicer because I'm gonna paint it at the end, so it's not the nicest wood, but I try to find the straightest 2x4s that I could get on Home Depot. Okay, for designing actually you just need an orbital sander, well, orbital random sander is this way. I'm using 80 grit and after that I'm using 150. Here's the base sketch of what I'm trying to do. It's in centimeters, not in inches, and also it depends on the, the base that you want to build. Maybe you want it flush with another table or an assembly table, something like that. But the basic idea is just a big box. First of all, I mark all my measurements. I try to check also the measurements of the wheels to see the actual height of it. It's gonna be different if you just make the box, but you need to include the height of the casters. Then I start ripping out all the lumber in the miter saw. You don't need a miter saw, I mean, this is for a table saw, so I'm assuming that you already have a table saw. You can actually do it in a table saw. It's gonna be a lot easier if you, in the case you don't have a miter saw. And the best way to assemble this, I mean, I do not have well, a really flat table. I'm just using those type of garden tables, black recreational picnic or whatever. So what I did is to actually clamp all the pieces as flush as I could, put some glue on them, and after that I just drew some pilot hole so I could assemble it, well, as best as I could. Of course, it wasn't exactly flush every single part, and not all the boards were as straight as I hoped to, but at the end it's really simple. Here I'm just countersinking some holes, and so you don't see screws. To be honest, you don't need to do this. You could actually just screw them directly, because this is not a piece that is going to be super pretty, neither. Well, I mean, if you want like a really nice shop with beautiful furniture in it just for working, that's completely fine, and I actually would like to do that, but I'm kind of poor, so I don't have too much money to do those type of things. Well, after you drove the pilot hole, something that it was a little bit of a pain is to exchange the drill bit every single time I need to drill a new hole and things like that, but actually it was pretty secure. And after I made one of the frames, I started joining them together with just more 2x4s. I actually was thinking of using pocket holes at this point, but to be honest, not everyone has a pocket hole jig, and it's a little bit expensive, especially if you're just starting out or you're just using some regular skewers that you already have on your house or anything like that. Here I'm just joining them. Also, everything I glued, it was just for the purpose of being as sturdy as it could. I mean, when I check it out, it wasn't flat on the floor, but also neither my table and neither the floor was actually flush. So what I did was just go with it and I start putting on the wheels. I just drew some pilot holes, but after I drew them, I discovered that actually I didn't need the pilot holes. I just needed to screw it with an impact driver and it worked just fine. The wood didn't split or anything like that, so I mean, you can do it that way. Well, here I'm just doing that, I guess. Well, after I drew all the screws, I just cut some leftover piece of plywood that I have laying around, and I said I wanted some type of like a shelf under the table saw. Actually I do not regret it, but I need to make some type of dust collection system, because when I tried out the first time, well, all the dust went just down right to that. Here I'm just sitting on my table saw. Remember, there's no table saw that actually is perfectly at 90 degrees, so you need to use your carpenter square and just check that you actually have it at 90 degrees. And here I made some pieces of wood just to get underneath the table saw in some parts of the plastic, so it could like lock it in, so I don't have to guess every time I put it in if I actually put it in the right place. It just always goes in the same spot. There's also another like group for the handle. I also made a piece of wood to actually like have the same shape in the same position, so that way it would be a little bit easier to just accommodate on both sides. It would be exactly the same. And I'm here just kind of trying to put the clamp on. Actually, let me just tell you, these are the cheapest clamps you can actually get. Of course, I'm gonna give you all the products that I use. I mean, there are basically all of them, I think you already have it. But if you want a really, really cheap set of clamps, these are the ones. To be honest, they rust pretty easily and they are not the best one. I would prefer to buy some like Irwin quick grips or anything like that. But like I mentioned before, I'm kind of poor, so I only have this one. Of course, you need to check that you have at least some glue squeezed out, just to make sure that you actually put it in pretty tight. Here I'm actually putting the other piece of wood, and I'm securing with just some pin nails with a brad nailer, and that's the part that I wanted to like check out. After that, I started painting the base white. Of course, just like an advice, any type of wood that you paint most of the time, especially pine that it's kind of thirsty, it's going to look pretty terrible. Really, really, really bad. But as long as you keep putting on coats and it starts to dry, you will see that it actually covers all the grain and things like that. You don't need to paint this, to be honest. This is not the nicest one. This is just the cheapest and easiest one I could think of, especially because I needed a mobile workbench, or well, a mobile table saw, because I work not exactly in my garage. In Mexico it's a little bit different, so basically it's like a inside driveway. I didn't have too much space, and of course it rains sometimes, so I need to move all my tools as quickly as possible so they don't get wet and things like that. It happened before and it's not good. Of course you get rust on the sauce and things like that, but well, I mean, it's gonna look something like that at first, the first coat, and to be honest, it just looks awful. Of course I did a great job, but well, at the end it looked kind of great. You can lock all the wheels and just remember to keep a quick wiggle